All right, cool. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Super excited to be here to talk about Gatsby today. Today I'll be talking about, as you might imagine, moving beyond static with Gatsby, React, and GraphQL. So for those of you who have heard of Gatsby, you might have heard of Gatsby as, yeah, it's great, but it's a static site generator. And what I want to do today is kind of show that that notion is not fully accurate and that Gatsby is like a very great choice for fully functional web applications. So, as mentioned, my name is Dustin Schau. I work for Gatsby, so most of you know the open source tool. Most of you don't know that we will also make money someday, hopefully, and there's a company behind Gatsby. And so the idea is that we are working to make Gatsby, the open source tool, easier, faster, better to use for like teams. And so that's what I get to work on every day, which is super amazing. And yeah, as mentioned, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. Has anyone heard of Nebraska before? Yeah. Is it from the Big Bang Theory? Is that how people know it? Oh, God, why? So anyways, my key idea here is that development has changed. And I think that the quicker that we adapt to this changing mindset, I think the better off that you're going to be, I think the better off that your applications are going to be, and I think the better off that your users are going to be. And so this whole talk is around this idea that by going static, by using something like Gatsby, there are real world benefits in doing so. And so one of the key foundations that prove this point is that JavaScript development has really never been better. I think the life of a JavaScript developer right now is better than it's been at any point in the last ever. And so for the why of why this is, everyone's here at this amazing conference in Israel at a JavaScript conference. That's awesome. And I think some of the whys for why this is true, or at least the main reason for why this is true, is that we have so many tools. Some have said the amount of tools we have are kind of overwhelming, and I can definitely empathize with that. But for me, I want to be in an ecosystem that's thriving, and so an ecosystem that has tons of tools where the best practice of 6 months ago might not be the best practice of today is one that's changing, thriving, and people are actually using it, and that's somewhere where I want to be. And so I mean, obviously, it's kind of a little challenging because you have to learn things all the time, every day. But again, that's where I want to be, and I hope that's where each of you want to be as well. And so some of these tools, most of you might be familiar with this little framework called React. So the why of why React is so transformative, I think ties into this idea right here. So this is Guillermo Rauch from Next, and he says, React is Legos for adults. And I think this really encapsulates the metaphor perfectly. So the whole component model, the whole structuring your application as these little reusable blocks of functionality, I think is the key idea that makes React, and really more broadly speaking, the component model, so great. So if you think of a header component is composed of a link component, a logo component, and then a search bar component. And so we can take these little building blocks, we can construct them into larger, more usable things, and then we can construct these applications from these building blocks of components. And so in the same way that playing with Legos was fun as a kid, so too is playing with React as an adult, or as a kid too. You can code whenever. And so this is my favorite way to write components, the functional model. So this is the hello world of React. Most of you have seen this, everyone has written this. You get the idea. This is what I want to write. Next, GraphQL. Hopefully most of you are familiar with GraphQL. Hopefully some of you have used it. So in the same way that React is a game changer for UIs, I think that GraphQL is a game changer for APIs and backend development. And so for the why of why this is, so this is the GraphQL query language. When you write this, it's a post request to your server. Your GraphQL endpoint will take this GraphQL query, which looks kind of like JSON, and it'll translate it to actual JSON, invoking whatever services, endpoints, etc., that you need to return data of that shape. So the really cool thing here is that what you see with this query is what you get. So when my consuming application sends this GraphQL query, I get back a shape of repository.stargazers.total count. So it directly maps the inputs of what the outputs are. Again, a very similar model to why React's so appealing. So my coworker Mikel says that GraphQL is the best way to query shit, yo, and I completely agree with him. So I won't go into a ton of detail on this. I think Node.js, again, has been a game changer. We've seen the rise of Node with things like microservices, Express, and also from like a flip side with like Node.js, NPM, and like build tooling. And so Gatsby uses Node.js as like a build engine, and it uses Node to power your Gatsby application when building it. And then of course Gatsby is kind of like a coalescing of each of these technologies, and we'll come back to how Gatsby fits into all of this in a little bit. But the key idea here is that these are tools that developers want to use. I mean, obviously, I think everyone in here, wants to and hopefully is using React. I hope that you want to use GraphQL, and if you aren't there yet, I think you can get there eventually because GraphQL is awesome. But oftentimes we can't, and this sucks like a lot. And so like the why of why we can't is you might be at a shop that's like an Angular shop, or a shop that's like a Vue shop, or you might be working on like a traditional like PHP app powered by like some CMS. And so oftentimes it's kind of hard to jive the model of like this cool new hot tech stack with this like legacy thing that I'm working on day to day. I do really think though that this is changing, and this is changing for a few reasons. The first of which is that excellent APIs are ubiquitous. And so what I think this has led to is that we've seen an explosion in this concept known as like software as a service, and I'll have a couple of examples in a sec. So for instance, what we've seen services like Auth0. So use Auth0 for your user authentication strategy. Stripe for e-commerce, Shopify for e-commerce. And so what each of these have led to is that these like one-off services specialize in one thing, and they do it really well. They have a whole team, that's powering Auth0, that's working on Shopify, that's working on Stripe, etc. And what this has kind of led to is that we've seen a natural decoupling of the CMS. So for instance, when you're working on like something like WordPress, I don't really want to use like WooCommerce. WooCommerce is not going to be as good as Stripe or as Shopify, because it's kind of like this tacked on thing onto this platform that really wasn't meant to be an e-commerce platform to begin with. And so what this is leading towards is that even the CMS is going headless. The CMS is focusing on the CM in CMS is focusing on content management as it should. And so there are some examples here. Contentful, Drupal, Strappy, these have all embraced going headless. Sanity, Dado, there's like, I would need like 20 slides to fit all of the CMSs that are going headless. These are just a couple examples. And so again, what this is leading towards is the idea that the monolithic CMS is dead, long live the headless CMS. So this leads into this next idea. Static site generators are so hot right now. There's a lot of them. There's of course, people know like Jekyll. People know maybe like a Levendy, a little bit smaller one. There's Gatsby, of course, but we'll get into how that's not totally true. And so what this leads to is the idea of Jamstack. Has anyone heard this term before? Okay, cool. So yeah, Jamstack is JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And I am a big proponent of the Jamstack. I really do think that like this whole idea is fantastic. And so to get into the why of why that's fantastic, I have a couple of examples. So first and foremost, when you use the Jamstack, I think that as a developer, you can use the tools that you want to use. So if I were doing my Jamstack, I would do React, GraphQL, and Node.js. Those are the tools I want to use. It kind of leads to this like natural tendency to like choose the tools that you want to like best do your job, which is like really appealing as a developer. It's like, okay, I'll choose this thing off the shelf, I'll choose this thing off the shelf, and I'll get this like awesome application as an end result. At the same time, the A in Jamstack, the APIs, it lets you use the best services. And so what that means is that you can focus on building out your application, not re-implementing the wheel, not spending 2 or 3 or 4 sprints like writing an auth service. Just use Auth0. It's going to do it better than you can, honestly, and you can build out more features in your application and get those features more quickly to your end users. And again, what you're doing at the end of the day is you're building UIs, you're building applications from these like disparate best-of-breed services and tools. You're literally choosing the best tools, the best APIs for the job, and the end result is like an application that is pretty great. However, this also kind of sucks. Why? Why does it suck, Dustin? Let me tell you. So the first of these is that performance can like easily degrade. No application has ever gotten better by throwing more API calls at it. And so when you have this application that's calling 5, 6, 10 APIs, the end result of the end result for your user is going to be a slower application because it's calling these like 10 APIs all in like waterfall fashion to like eventually serve this page that works relatively well. It's complex business logic to combine data sources. So when you're using each of these different sources, it's pretty challenging to merge them all and to like get them all in like one structured database. It can be challenging to implement state management. So like calling all these services, passing them through like your Redux store and ensuring they're available at the right time in the right place, not super easy. And the more of these services you call, the harder this is going to get. So I think it's easy to critique something. It's harder to critique something and then propose something better. So the something better is something that we're calling the content mesh. And the content mesh is kind of what powers Gatsby, and I think what makes Gatsby so appealing. So let me talk a little bit about why it's so appealing. So the first is that separate content and data sources are unified into a single experience. So if we look at what an application written with Gatsby could look like, you're still using the same services, the like best of breed services that you want to use. So for instance, Cloudinary is great at like optimizing images and assets. Let's use that for our images. Algolia knows search. Let's use that for our searching. Contentful is good at content. Stripe is good at e-commerce. And let's query these all, ideally, most of them at build time. And then the end result is like a highly optimized, compiled Gatsby application that still lets you focus on like delivering features quickly, but your users will thank you because your application will be faster because you're querying this as much as possible at build time. And I'll show this in a little bit more in depth in a second. Again, this whole idea here is use the best tools for the job. This is still true from the Jamstack. You can still pick and choose what you want, except now the hope is that there's probably a Gatsby plugin that invokes that API at build time, and then you can use that with GraphQL. Again, you can join disparate data sources with GraphQL. So for instance, if we think back to that example, I can query Contentful with GraphQL with the Gatsby source Contentful plugin. I can get my product listing with Shopify or with Stripe. I can optimize my images with Cloudinary, and I can do this all as much as possible at build time so that I'm not passing off that upfront cost to the users. I'm doing it at build time so that the build might take a little bit longer, but your user's application is going to be highly optimized and highly fast. And this is oftentimes overstated and somehow understated. So the idea of going static is more appealing, I think, than for a few reasons. So cost. Static content is going to be so cheap, so easy to use. So putting S3 and then CloudFront in front of it is literally pennies on the dollar to host your static application. And compare and contrast that with spinning up Node.js servers to host your server rendered app. No, thank you. That's not really the business I want to get into. So I think you're saving in complexity and cost, developer time, and static content is just super easy to host. And so static content is what Gatsby produces. So all of this, I think, is amazing. I hope that you think it's amazing too. And the end result is that you get a blazing fast experience doing so. And so it's honestly gotten kind of meme-worthy how often we say blazing fast, so I think we need a different term. But anyone who has used a Gatsby application, for instance, react.js.org, if anyone's looked at the docs before, that's a Gatsby app. And it's pretty cool to be able to say that that's an application that uses Gatsby, and it's a super fast, great example of what a Gatsby application can be. All right, all of this. Let's get back into the meat of this talk. Let's talk about Gatsby, because I hope that's what brought you here. So I call this thought leader-driven development. So Wes Boss, as most of you may know, tweeted about Gatsby a while ago. He said, "I think Gatsby is going to be a tool many agencies use to replace WordPress themes because it doesn't just provide a better developer experience, but it outputs a better website at the end of the day. It's faster, safer, compressed, inline minified without any sweat." And so the idea here is that when you change to this static content model, there are a ton of benefits. And then if you think of Gatsby more as an app compiler, as an app optimizer, I think that's a better mental model to hold for what Gatsby does rather than purely static site generator. And so how it does this is we expose Node APIs to load any data source into GraphQL. And so these Node APIs can and are invoked by little reusable blocks of Node APIs called plugins. And so for instance, Gatsby source Contentful will query their REST API. It'll expose that data into Gatsby's GraphQL layer. And then you can build out a site from Contentful, which doesn't even rely on Contentful at all as far as the end user is concerned, because what you get is a static application that queries Contentful or queries Stripe or Shopify or whatever using these plugins, using these Node APIs. And the key idea here is that you're changing this from a runtime request to a build time request. So if you think of like a headless CMS, we've heard like anecdotally, people will move off like WordPress or Drupal and save like $5,000 to $10,000 a month because they can like drastically spin down their CMS instances, query it once rather than querying it for every single user, and then kind of produce like a read-only clone sort of your CMS, of your content layer. And my key phrase here is static as much as possible. So you can optimize, build out at build time as much as you can, but Gatsby produces a React application. And I'll get into that in a little bit once it hits the browser. And this is a key one. So it's blazing fast by default. There isn't any opt-in nature to make a Gatsby application fast. There's write your application using React, using GraphQL, using these tools that I think that you know and love. And then the end result is an application that your users will love, and that's fast by default rather than fast by optimizing every couple sprints. And so to kind of illustrate this, there are a number of performance acronyms. I'm curious how many people know. So there's H2, HTTP2, there's PRPL, there's Rail, Flip, SPA, Service Worker, TTI, FMP, yada yada. You get the idea. And the question I'll ask you is, how many of those did you actually know? So if you caught it, I only knew a couple of them, the whole words. Of course I know the concept, but what this means is that you don't have to be a performance expert to get a really fast application using Gatsby. And so if you do know these, all the better. That's awesome that we each are internalizing these performance techniques. But in using Gatsby, you get a fast application. You don't have to be a performance expert to get that. And so because it's static content, you can deploy your content wherever. So on the edge, on a CDN, or in the server in your basement somewhere. Doesn't matter. It's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images. You can deploy it wherever. So you're probably all thinking neat, but Gatsby is just a static site generator though, right? No, it's not. So producing static assets is not the same as a static app. And so, what if I told you that a Gatsby site is a React application? So what gets produced, what your users are going to hit client side, is a fully functional React application. You can do things like authentication. You can do things like HTTP requests. You can do anything that you can in a real application, because what gets shipped to the browser is a real application. It's a React application at the end of the day. It's just statically optimized up front. And so how I really think of Gatsby is why wouldn't you compile your application up front as much as possible? Why wouldn't you turn that JSX, that React code that eventually produces HTML, into static HTML as much as possible? And this is the key idea of Gatsby. So to kind of illustrate all of these concepts, I have 7 minutes to do some live coding, so we will do just that. So what I did is I created an application called Gatsby Mail. Just to be clear, it's not a real product. We aren't pivoting into the Gmail competitor business. Just for funsies, just to show that Gatsby can produce a fully dynamic, real application. And so in case the demo doesn't work, here's what it looks like. It looks like, it looks kind of like a Gmail-like experience. Welcome to Gatsby Mail. You log in, you see your emails, and then you can send new emails. So let's do a demo. All right. Okay, so the first thing I want to show is Gatsby's idea of optimizing at build time, kind of compiling away a fetch request that doesn't need to be passed on to the user. And so how I'm going to show that is I'm going to invoke GitHub's GraphQL API at build time. And so I've already set this up utilizing a Gatsby plugin. It's called Gatsby Source GraphQL. And so what it does is it allows you to stitch in this remote schema that GitHub exposes, and I can then query this at build time. And so what this ends up looking like is something like this. All right, so I do want to show this new Explorer thing. So for anyone who hasn't used GraphQL, which I didn't know GraphQL before I started using Gatsby, and I think Gatsby is one of the best ways to learn GraphQL. And we recently shipped, like literally last week, a cool new feature that I think makes it a lot easier to use. So what you can do is you can visually like click and like create a query. So for instance, I want to query a repository. I want to grab the stargazers, and then I want to grab the total count. And so when I run this query, again, remember the shape on the left reflects the structure on the right. So I see GitHub, repository, stargazers, total count, and the data as JSON is passed down. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this query to then, in my Gatsby application, and then parse it out at build time. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to use what's called a static query in Gatsby. And so these are going to be parsed and evaluated and then replaced with the JSON, from this GraphQL query, so that there's no trace of a connection to GitHub in my end application. And so that's literally all I have to do. I save this, and then now you can see, now I have the total number of stars that are shown for this repo. So I can click through, and I can see the stargazers for this repo. And so the idea here is that I don't really care if this is like exactly up to date. If this is off by like 5 stars, all right, I'll rebuild it, once a day or once every five days or whatever. It's fine. This is like a proxy to like the real metric. And so I don't want a GitHub connection in my end result just to display this little piece of data. And so this is better for the users and is just better in general. So now what I want to do is I want to write an authentication piece so that this login button will actually work. I have 4 minutes to do so. So remember, if you think back to what I said earlier, Gatsby produces like create React app. So once it hits the browser, I can do anything I can in like a normal React application. And one of those, of course, is authentication. So Gatsby exposes a couple APIs for this. There's Gatsby browser. So this is actually how this is going to work. I am going to wrap my application in this Apollo provider so that I can then query with GraphQL this Gmail. I can query Gmail at runtime, not at build time. And so I'm creating this provider, I'm passing it this Apollo client, and then now what I want to do is set up this authentication piece. So this is all credit to OneGraph. OneGraph is a really cool company that wraps a bunch of GraphQL, wraps a bunch of APIs with like a GraphQL layer. So you can query Twitter, GitHub, Gmail, etc. with this. And so that's actually what I'm doing here. So this is the auth piece. And then now what I want to do is, because everyone needs to use the latest and greatest, I'm going to use hooks. So I'll use state, I'll use effect, and then I'll use ref. I'm going to use that auth service, the auth utility I just showed. First thing is I want to set up a stateful variable, authenticated. So this will be used to pass down to any child components, whether I'm authenticated or not. I want to set authenticated. By default, this will be false. Next, I'm going to use effect. Use effect is effectively like component did mount, and then component will unmount. Next, I want to set up a ref so that I can pass my auth ref. So I'll do const auth equals use ref. I can do auth.current equals get auth. So then that's using this get auth utility I exposed earlier. Let's make sure nothing's broken. Still working. Nothing's actually working yet, but it's not broken, which is good. So now I want to actually check my authentication status. So this is going to be auth.current.is logged in, auth service. This exposes a promise. And then I can just set authenticated to what that is. So what that'll do is that when this component is mounted, if you're already authenticated, it'll keep you authenticated. If you're not authenticated, it'll set it to false. Again, not authenticated, working just fine. Let's pass this down appropriately. And then now I want to set up some utilities that I then pass to anyone who uses this provider. So log in and then log out. First thing is I'm going to await, again, because it's a promise, auth.current.login, auth service. I'm presuming it's going to pass here, so I'll just set authenticated to true. I can pretty much just copy and paste this for logout, change it to logout, change this to false. All right, so now let's go back. Let's log in with Google. So again, this is powered by OneGraph. A lot of the heavy lifting wasn't done by me, but this is like the power of like use the best tools, use the best services that are available to you. Let's log in. All right, and then now we see my mail. I was going to send a message, but we have 20 seconds, so assume it works. It does. And let me go back to my slides real quick. So again, this key idea, development has changed. I think the quicker you adopt to this mindset, I think the better off you're going to be and the better off your applications are going to be. And my advice is build with Gatsby, but I'm incredibly biased. So check Gatsby out. Let us know what you think, and then we can't wait to see what you'll build. Thank you.